Welcome, everybody. It's Emerald Live, our educational series. I'm Jill Cohen, the Managing Director of Emerald Live, the webinar division of Emerald Media Group. First, I'd like to thank our partners, Supernova, Last Prisoner Project, Pro Cannabis Media, The Cannaboss Lady, Garden State Normal, Toketivity, Hetty, New Jersey, and colorofchange.org. First, for some housekeeping, I would encourage everyone to share your social media pages and your LinkedIn profile. We want to encourage networking. And to ask questions, please click on the tab at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A, and we will get to the questions at the end of the panel discussion. So today we're discussing Cali Sober. The term Cali Sober refers to people who don't drink but smoke weed. Although our panel might argue with that and say, you can have a drink here and there. Is this the latest trend in catching a buzz without the calories and the hangover of alcohol? Is this a movement? Is this a new lifestyle? Can't wait to hear from our wonderful panel on how the California people are doing this and how they could bring it over to the East Coast. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Jimmy Young, co-founder of Pro Cannabis News, who is going to give us a 2-minute clip on industry news.
All right. Thank you very much, Jill. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I am Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. We are a group of like-minded pro cannabis media producers who create news, information, educational content, and of course, talk shows all about the cannabis industry. We're now live streaming on PCMTV 24/7 on Roku's streaming channels. Now, you will see this webinar as well as others from past Emerald Media Group videos and webinars on demand on PCMTV as well. So check it out on Roku's streaming channels. And here's a quick wrap up of the past month in news from cannabis. Now, there is a major story brewing about shipping hardware for the vaping industry. In case you haven't heard, as part of the last COVID relief bill in 2020, an amendment was added on page 5,136 of that bill. I didn't read it all. That has already impacted shipping of vape products over the next 30 days. UPS, FedEx, DHL, and the U.S. Postal Service is stopping shipping of all vape cartridges, pens, and even the charging adapters. Dana Shockett, a veteran and CEO of O2 Vape, has appeared on a number of our talk shows over the past few weeks to talk about the impact on this entire industry. And we'll be talking about the lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. to get this barrier removed with the NCAA Communications Director, Morgan Fox, on this week's Green Rush Live, Fridays 4 to 6 p.m. on Pro Cannabis Media's network. Now, speaking of Washington, D.C., the Last Prisoner Project is now circulating a petition to present to President Joe Biden to create an independent clemency board that would expedite past cannabis-related convictions. You could go onto cannabisclemency.org. That's cannabisclemency.org. And you too can sign up just like I did earlier today. Now, this is not without precedent, since President Gerald Ford did the same thing after the Vietnam War for those who refused service at that time. As far as the cannabis business goes, the big just keep getting bigger. Curaleaf, a multi-state operator based here in Massachusetts, is one of the largest in the cannabis space, is now moving into European markets. A week ago, Curaleaf acquired EMAC Life Sciences. Now, it could be EMEC Life Sciences, but either way, they paid $286 million in stock and cash. Curaleaf will now add 8 countries to its portfolio, including Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the UK. Speaking of acquisitions in the cannabis industry, Green Rose Acquisition Corporation of New York is a company that just acquires other companies. And now they're stepping into the cannabis space. They picked up 4 cannabis businesses: the Health Center, Shango Holdings, TheraPlant, and True Harvest. Each of those companies are operating in a total of 7 states. So those multi-state operators continue to merge and acquire in order to build out their footprint. That deal was worth $210 million with $170 million in cash. The state of Maine's biggest city is Portland, Maine, and they finally have a few dispensaries open for adult use 5 months after that state opened up its market. Seaweed opened on Friday the 12th, and Grassroots Marijuana is opening today. Now, a long way away from Maine is Arizona, where adult use sales has now reached $2.9 million in sales in the first 10 days of their operation. Sales started on January 22nd when 73 of the 130 licensees were approved by that state's Department of Health Services. Arizona has set a record as the fastest launch of the adult use market in the United States. That's a quick wrap up of the latest cannabis news. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Now back to Jill Cohen for Emerald's monthly educational webinar, this week focusing on California Sober. Explain that to me, please, Jill.
Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Christina DiGiovanni, our CEO of Emerald Media Group. She's going to introduce our wonderful moderator.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you to all of our sponsors, Heady New Jersey, and everyone out there who is attending today's webinar. It is with great pleasure to introduce our moderator. Her name is Hadass Alderman. She's a founding partner at Plant Medicine Law Group. She is an Israeli-American attorney born in Jerusalem and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. My heart goes out to you, California. She has a degree from Berkeley Law and the University of California at Santa Cruz. She advises companies on matters of regulatory compliance, policy, risk management, strategic planning, revenue models, corporate governance, pretty much anything that you need a lawyer for, this girl's got you covered. She's led clients through successful licensing applications in states like California, Maryland, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And she's even a board member on the Psychedelic Bar Association. So without further ado, Das, I turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Christina. That was a very sweet introduction. And I blushed a little bit because we do, in fact, my firm does provide a lot of legal services, but we don't do patent law. And whenever I'm on a plant medicine related panel, I just feel that I need to flag that and give those patent lawyers the credit they deserve. So now I want to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves before I start asking them all kinds of questions about their substance use. So Andrew, let's start with you.
Well, hi, everybody. It's great to be with all of you today. My name's Andrew D'Angelo. Many of you are probably familiar with my older brother, Steve D'Angelo. Steve and I have been doing cannabis advocacy, cannabis trading, cannabis activism, and social justice for many decades now. We're probably best known for our vertically integrated cannabis company here in California called Harborside. And we exited Harborside recently, and now I'm chair of Last Prisoner Project, which is a nonprofit that helps get cannabis prisoners out of prison and re-entered into society with their records expunged. That's me.
Great.
And
Libby, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I've been a huge fan of Andrew and his brother, so it's an honor to be on a panel with you.
Likewise, Libby. Likewise. Love your brand, love your feed.
So I'll introduce myself. I'm Libby Cooper. I'm the co-founder of Space Coyote, and we make infused joints that are super potent, super delicious. We do hash infused joints, live resin infused joints, and diamond infused joints. We're going to be launching high potency flower very soon as well, along with some special collaborations. We do a lot of collaborations with different extract producers throughout the state of California. And as we look to expand into other states, we're definitely going to be reaching out to different extract producers there. But I think the thing that holds closest to my heart is collaborating with different artists. So we've done a collaboration with Poolside, doing a custom pack of joints with them. And we're about to be launching with Slightly Stoopid as well. So it's very exciting. I'm just getting to meet all of my favorite musicians. So it's really special.
Amazing. All right. So, like any attorney, I love a definition. So let's start there. I'm curious to hear, I think we all have like a basic understanding of what California sober is, but I have a sense that each of you has their own nuanced version. And I think that would be a nice way to ground the conversation and start us off. So Libby, if you wouldn't mind letting us know how you have come to define what California sober means.
So to me, California sober is something that I started when I was 21. I think my definition is not drinking alcohol, not doing substances that are addictive, and sort of sticking to what comes from the earth and that isn't really messed with too much, which for me definitely means smoking a lot of weed and dabbling in some psychedelics as well. I definitely stick more to mushrooms, doing more of like a introspective mushroom trip once or twice a year, and experiencing other psychedelics, once or twice, in general, just to have the experience of trying. But I definitely used weed as an excuse to not drink. By the time I turned 21, I pretty quickly realized that drinking just wasn't for me. And it was a social crutch at first. I would go out to a bar with friends, and instead of seeming lame at that sort of tender, vulnerable age, I would be that cool chick outside smoking a joint, inviting everybody to smoke with me, meeting new people. And it's sort of stuck with me that way. I definitely don't need to have an excuse not to drink now, but it was a great gateway into it.
That makes sense. Andrew, what about you? What's your definition?
Well, my definition of Cali sober is very similar to Libby's. I think that there's a lot of flexibility. Remember, we're talking about the word Cali and the word sober put together, and Cali is short for California. And California doesn't do anything rigidly. We don't have one definition for anything really. We like things to be in the gray areas or more of a rainbow area. And so some people can have a glass of wine every once in a while, or even maybe every evening, and call themselves Cali sober. And I'm not going to say you're not Cali sober because you like to have a little bit of wine. The definition has some flexibility, right? The important thing is you're not strung out on any hard drugs or alcohol, and that whatever intoxicants you're choosing to do, natural intoxicants like cannabis and psychedelics, visionary plants, they're adding to your life. They're not subtracting, or you're not dependent on these things. You're not addicted to these things. They're creating additions to your life, not subtracting from your life. So my personal practice of Cali sober is I don't have any alcohol in there. And I know my good friend TJ is in the chat room, and he's a recovering, is in recovery, and he's used cannabis to recover. And in fact, one of the co-founders of AA, which I wrote about in my Playboy article about Cali sober, and TJ's the one who told me about him. He had an LSD trip when the government was experimenting with LSD with people. He was one of the people that got experimented, and it changed his whole life. And he believed that psychedelics could be used to cure people of alcoholism. And so psychedelics and visionary plants and cannabis, when I had Harborside, when we were a medical cannabis dispensary, we got a lot of people off of pills. We got a lot of people off of booze. We got a lot of people out of AA. I'm not out of AA, but out of addiction and into a healthy lifestyle. We didn't say you have to give up everything in life and you have to be a totally sober person, and you can't take any weed and you can't take anything. No, that's not, we were a cannabis dispensary. So of course you can take the cannabis. And so it's this idea of substituting plants for harder intoxicants is been around. That practice has been around a long time, and the idea of being in a harm reduction strategy with your intoxicants in life, meaning I know myself well enough to know that I'm not going to be a completely sober human being, but if I'm going to have intoxicants in my life, let's make sure they're the least harmful ones possible. And that's the whole idea of harm reduction. Harm reduction is kind of a precursor term for Cali Sober, I would say, almost in a way, not quite matching it exactly, but I like Cali Sober so much better because it's positive and it's fun, and it contains more possibilities in it, and it just feels more positive than harm reduction, and it more inclusive, and like you can actually get up in the morning and have an operating system that you can plug into and understand, and increases your longevity actually instead of decreasing it.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned inclusivity, and one of the things that I find interesting about Cali Sober, as a choice, as a lifestyle, is that to me, it seems a little bit, I don't want to say exclusive, because obviously there's no one policing the boundaries of who gets to define themselves as what here. However, I do notice that, alcohol is something that is available everywhere. It's cheap to get. And unlike cannabis, you can consume it in Section 8 housing, for example. Similarly, when we think about who's being policed and living in areas where you might not feel comfortable walking around with mushrooms in your pocket, to me, that raises some issues of who this is accessible to. And I'm curious what that brings up for the two of you, and how we might go about, working to make this lifestyle accessible to anyone that wants it.
It's such a good question. I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently. I think for me, I wasn't really ever talking about, what my intake of these vices were. I still very much feel like they are vices. They're medicine, but also how I work with cannabis and my company is very much recreational. It's like the fun side, that like exploring the psychedelic side of weed. And I think that a lot of legislation has to change, but at the root of all of this is escapism. I think a lot of people are turning to substances to relieve themselves of stresses of just what it is to be a human. And it is going to take a lot of access, but I personally don't have the answer. But it is definitely sort of like top of mind for me. I don't know how to encourage people to drink less if they don't have access or the ability to smoke weed free of any sort of imminent danger. I mean, it's such a luxury for me to be able to just like literally get on a plane with some joints in my bag and feel like I can fly around California. And I have this pre-prepared sob story, and that is my own, white privilege, because I don't have any fear. I don't carry any fear with me. But the idea, the notion that someone wouldn't even be able to smoke in the privacy of their own home, obviously they would be drinking. I would be drinking in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, it of course, wide access to cannabis is being prevented by bad public policy. It's not the fault of our communities, the cannabis communities, or communities of color or LGBTQ or any of us in our tribe. We're trying to create more access. But I do worry, well, I'm not worried, but we have to be mindful whenever we try to define anything these days. And that's what Cali Sober, we're trying to define a practice and a lifestyle with the term Cali Sober. And we always have to be mindful that that doesn't become a definition just for white people. And that's not what we're trying to do here. It's not what I'm trying to do here. In fact, just the opposite. I think Cali Sober, I hope, is something that all of our communities can use as a name and a title and an umbrella for a practice, because in alternative communities and communities of color or hippies or any of us in our tribe, we have been plagued by substance abuse. We have been plagued by substance abuse. We've been plagued by alcoholism. I've gone to funerals, many, many funerals. I've been doing this a long time. I can name them. Okay. So in our community, this is a especially important thing to have, to have a little bit of seriousness with too, as you just wrote, and such a good question, because I want to have a lot of fun talking about Cali Sober and so forth, but it's really, we don't want this to be, we always have to be mindful when we're talking about a new thing that we're defining, that we include everybody. And so I hope that those in the artists and the musicians and the people will take the terminology and talk about it and make it their own and share it with their communities. And the idea is we're creating longevity and we're stopping the funerals. That's the idea.
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. So Andrew, I'm curious, like, you said something about Cali Sober being a life, like I think we've all sort of said like lifestyle and practice. And what is it about, I guess, a lifestyle or practice of fully negating something, saying, I do not consume any substances? Of course, there's scenarios in which that really works, but I think for a lot of people that doesn't work, and having like a full-on black and white yes or no is just difficult. What do you think it is about us as humans, or maybe just us as Californians, that makes that so difficult and that makes the concept of Cali Sober feel so good?
Well, I just think this binary world that we've been living in is really a product of the dominant culture more than anything else. And there was this giant, we've had this puritanical sobriety streak in the United States from the beginning. Remember, alcohol was prohibited in this country for 10 years, not too long ago. And there were some good reasons why that movement occurred. People were drinking too much and beating the crap out of each other, and the women in society were being victimized by this. So there's a lot of complex history to this. But then we had the war on drugs, and we had this whole thing that you were either a total F up if you even took a joint, or you were totally sober and cool with the mainstream society. And you would lose your job if you failed a piss test. You couldn't talk about it at family dinner. You couldn't wear a shirt like this without being totally ostracized, and your livelihood threatened, and police following you and searching you and all that kind of stuff. So what that does to a culture is pretty intense. It's pretty intense, man. And so like, you've got people like my friend TJ who were really sick. We're really, really sick with alcohol. We're really, really sick with hard drugs. And now they've been healed with plants, whether it be cannabis or other plants. And what are they going to do? They're supposed to give up the plant they're supposed to give up the plant now that saved their life because of this binary definition of sobriety that was beaten into our head by a dominant culture that was wrong in the first place? No. So what, and this movement is not started by me. The younger people like Michelle that we tried to have on, Michelle Luke, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but I think it's Luke. She coined the term, or one of the people that coined the term Cali Sober, and she wrote about it in Vice. And it's really that it's come from the new generation of people, but it's a long practice. And we never had a name for it. We called it harm reduction. We called it good drugs, bad drugs. But when you start calling things good and bad, then you're back into that binary thing. It's problematic, right? It's not inclusive. And so if we want to be inclusive, binary things, while they're comfortable for the human brain to wrap their hand, it's easier. It's harmful. So the idea is you can define it yourself. Again, you're in control of your lifestyle and your practice, not it in control of you. I know people that are strung out on meditation. They're strung out on meditation. They can't stop meditating. Every time they have a problem, they go meditate. And they don't want to talk to you. They don't, it's like, let's go meditate. And so it's like, we want to, the practices that we have in our lives, with meditation or weed or whatever it is, we want to have our observer and our true selves sort of directing that traffic and not having it the other way around. And so that's sort of, I think, where there's room in the definition of sobriety.
Yeah. So that reminds me of something, Libby, you said earlier that I wanted to go back to. You talked about you said there's medicine and then there's vice. And the line between those two things is something that I think, having experienced both, I can say that I know when I'm engaging in one versus the other. And sometimes it's about the substance and sometimes it's about my approach to the substance. And if I think about it, I could probably like hammer out a definition, but I'm curious. I'm much more curious what your definition of the two would be, or like your experiential definition of each one.
Yeah, my experiential definition, which is an excellent way to start it off because it's definitely not like the definition, but from my own anecdotal experience, I got into cannabis at first for medical reasons, for my autoimmune disease. And I still, if I get a flare up, I still use cannabis. I usually go for like a 1-to-1 THC to CBD ratio. And I know exactly how much I need to smoke, when I need to smoke it. And it's sort of like, it's very much medicating because it wears off and then I smoke more. And then when I smoke, normally I'm just not even approaching it through that lens. I'm just like, I want to get high and I'm a total sativa diva. And I just like, love these landrace strains. And it's fun. And even how I'm talking about it now, you can tell there's an actual switch in how I'm thinking about it. And that goes the same for the sort of psychedelic substances that I would use in a party setting versus for more of that reflection or the neurogenesis that I'm looking for. I could use mushrooms to dance the night away if I'm throwing an event with my friends, but equally I could use that same plant to, go off into the forest by myself or microdose, whatever it is. So I think this line between vice and medicine is truly how we're able to internalize it and use it with intention. And I don't think a vice doesn't have intention. I think the vice's intention is just to have fun, but it is usually, a bit more freeform and playful, and you become childlike. Whereas I think in the medicine sense, for me at least, it's pain management, or it's getting over a very low emotion, or it's overcoming something that my own brain isn't able to do, my own mind and body together aren't able to do on their own, and it needs that additional assistance. I mean, similar to meditation, it's that additional assistance. Whereas I think for Vice, I could have that much fun. I could totally have that much fun, but I'm kind of like letting loose.
So I love that, all of that, first of all. Second of all, I'm curious. So, okay, we bifurcated medicine and Vice. Another word you used earlier was escapism. Is all Vice escapism? Why or why not?
Ooh. No, I think that's in both categories, because I think escapism, you can be using medicine to tap into escapism. I think more specifically in depression and PTSD, like escapism might have a more negative connotation, like maybe we all have some judgment associated with it, but I think of the escapism for your mental state in that situation. Maybe when you're having a back spasm, you take a muscle relaxant and it's actually able to release whatever is going on, so that even when that muscle relaxer wears off, you are in that relaxed state. I think that if you're having some sort of anxiety attack and you use cannabis to escape out of that mode, you can actually soothe yourself. It's like massaging out those pathways in your mind that you can then, come out of the high, but still be relaxed. So I think that's a medicinal approach to escapism.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, it seems that there's, with medicine, there's somewhat of an enduring effect, whereas the Vice category, the fun category, it's this is happening to me now. I'm enjoying this now, which arguably is, I think that's medicine in its own way. Yeah. So, I remember the moment I realized, like, I don't really like alcohol. I don't like how it makes my body feel. I don't love the way what it makes me do. And I'm curious, Andrew, what was that moment for you, if at all, if ever? And why? And what do you think? And do you think this is something more people are going to experience, or do you think this is going to remain sort of like a niche vegan type thing?
No, I think Cali Sober, like we were talking about before we started chatting in the green room, I think this has real legs, this idea and this concept, because it's not just getting off alcohol that a lot of people, and opioids and things like that. It's also getting off of fossil fuels. It's also getting off of plastic. It's also the wonderful thing about this idea, I think, is that it can be broad. It can be very, very broad. So I don't think it's just a fad, especially if people like us keep talking about it and celebrating it. And I do hope, because the world needs it. I think the world actually needs it. And now we have a really cool name for it, because California exports very well to the rest of the world. So that would be. And what was the first part of the question?
So what was your
what was my moment? Yeah, my moment. Well, look, I unfortunately come from a family of alcoholics. So on my mother's side. So my mother had 8 brothers and sisters. They all were buried because of drugs and alcohol. And both of her parents, my mom's parents, my grandparents, were also buried because of drugs or alcohol. Alcohol mainly was what my mom, by the grace of God, that gene skipped her, and she didn't take the alcohol. by the grace of God, or I wouldn't be talking to you today. So I'm going to all those funerals as a kid was probably the biggest thing. And then just my own body, I have a genetic anemia. I have, and so alcohol just doesn't do good in my body. It doesn't feel right. The first 90 minutes is great. You know, the first 90 minutes of alcohol, especially a nice champagne or nice glass of wine or something, very great. But from minute 91 till hour 12 suck. and my body just can't deal with it. And so I stopped, you know, pretty much after college. I did get into wine in my 40s because I fell in love with my wife and she was into wine. But after a few years, it was like, it's just not working. So I had to give that up too. And psychedelics have been a part of my life since I was a teenager. And it's just, you know, that's kind of how I pray. And heal. So psychedelics have just been in there for a long time. And even LSD it comes from the ergot plant or ergot plant, one of those two. So all these things come from plants, you know, and so that's how it happened for me. I think a lot of people come to this lifestyle similarly. Either they went to too many funerals or they almost killed themselves. And so they come to this that way, and that's my story too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wonder if, and you know, it sounds like, you know, there are people out there for whom California sober does include some level of alcohol, and that really makes me think about the concept of right relationship to different substances and how that is different for each person. And, you know, not for me to decide for anyone else, but I think it's really interesting to examine what is my right relationship to alcohol, and what are the scenarios where it makes the most sense. If there are some, you know, like I grew up in Northern California, lived there for much of my adult life. When you're in Northern California, you have access to the best weed in the world. Why would you drink alcohol? It doesn't make sense. When you're in Florida, the same is not true, especially if you're someone like me that really loves outdoor, you know, sun-grown Humboldt cannabis. So I do drink more when I'm here in Miami. And I'm curious about, you know, whether or not the two of you, or let's start with you, think that there's space within this this movement, this lifestyle for flexibility, even in, you know, incorporating alcohol.
I definitely think so. I think it's funny to talk about it publicly, though I do think it is important. But yeah, it's funny to just talk about this because I think it's so much about personal preference, and what we're really talking about here is just like moderation, but moderation is self-defined as well. So, you know, I don't drink alcohol, but on Saturday night, I had a glass of red wine, and that was my first glass of red wine in like 6 months. And actually a very similar thing to what Andrew just described. I was like, ooh, this is great. And then, you know, an hour and a half in, I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I don't drink. But it's, you know, if my body loved it, tolerated it, sure, I'm sure I would enjoy to have more wine or a cocktail here or there. But it is my, you know, internal system rejecting the substance. So it's all about like, yes, longevity, but I think it's also about tapping into how do you actually feel and what organs are being affected and how does your mind feel the next day, and you know, is it prematurely aging you, and if it's not, if you have a very robust system, then I think that's great. And if it is affecting you, but your baseline is such that you have the foundation that you can push through a little bit of a hangover, or you don't really mind being taken down a couple notches, then that's that's great. But I mean, Cali Soba could be renamed as, you know, almost like an Ayurvedic practice. It's just about understanding, like, okay, I'm in this season, this fresh food is available, I'm going to be eating this, I'm going to be smoking this outdoor flower because it was just harvested, and like I know the cultivator. Like, it's Cali Soba is this lifestyle of taking advantage of what nature offers to you and just not going overboard in anything. So, you know what? Miami's like a total drinking scene. You know, if you can
Alcohol's always
handle it. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you know, if you do ever learn about Ayurveda, like winter is the season. If you're going to drink, like do it in winter.
Oh, really? I didn't know. Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
it's because it's like a very warming. We can all tell it's like very warming. I remember in college we'd be like, put on your beer jackets, and just, you know, so you don't you can like go out in a cute outfit and not be cold. But it's very much like if you're in a cold place, you know, and your body can tolerate it, maybe you can have some drinks without taking your body's health down. I just have found that my healthiest, most vibrant state is not drinking.
look,
Yeah.
it's also the American way it embraces liberty and freedom, and certainly the California way does too. So, will there be people falling down drunk with a joint in their hand saying, "I'm Cali Sober, man"? Yeah, there probably will be, because there's idiots, you know, in the world. And there's nothing where any of us are going to be able to do as advocates of this lifestyle or thinkers or thought leaders of this lifestyle, where there's nothing we're going to be able to do about that. But does it mean you have to not have any alcohol in your life and you don't have the freedom to have that glass of wine on every 6 months? No, of course not. Come on, man. Have your wine, bust open your Cristal on your anniversary with your husband. If you're in Miami and there's no good weed, and I mean, access is the issue, right? That's your issue. Your issue isn't I have any issues other than access. What a bummer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fortunately, I visit California a lot, so it's okay.
All right, good.
So I want to bring Dr. Carl Hart and his work into this conversation because I find him really fascinating. And you know, I can't summarize the entirety of his work, obviously, but what I will say is he is a neuroscientist, an American neuroscientist who taught and researched at Columbia University for many years. I believe he just left for sabbatical. But he just published a book called Drug Use for Grownups. And he talks about a lot of different things in this book, some of which I think very much align with this conversation here, and some of which maybe don't, which is wonderful. And one of the like the pull quotes you see from this book everywhere is, "I use heroin to make me a better person." He is a super open heroin user, and he says he uses the amount he needs to get the thing he wants from it, and then takes care of his work responsibilities, his family responsibilities, et cetera, which I just think is really interesting. And I'm curious, one, what the two of you think about that, and two, how does this reconcile with our conversation and with California Sober generally?
I think it relates exactly to what we're talking about. It's sort of this freedom of choice and moderation, knowing yourself, knowing your limits. I personally had, the intrigue. Now I want to dive into research onto, who he is and his work. But I think we all have this weird obsession with drugs from the very like sinister side of it. I remember being fascinated by walking around the streets of San Francisco at first when I originally lived there, and seeing people use heroin on the streets, and it just be this like, shocking, mesmerizing thing. You almost like lock into just that single moment, and you have tunnel vision. But it's, yeah, I mean, it's all about knowing your own limits. I would love to see us decriminalize all drugs. I think that would be the healthiest society, and would probably help a lot of people with the opiate addiction, because there is this, over access to pain medication and then under access to everything else.
Yeah, to everything that can help you get off pain medication.
Yeah.
No, I haven't read the book yet. I certainly saw.
I know. Can you repeat it? Because I want to look this up right now.
Yeah. So his name is Dr. Carl Hart, Hart. And the book is called Drug Use for Grown-ups.
No, I'm glad that there are academics and other thought leaders and thinkers writing about this that perhaps have more credibility than I do. But that's really, I think what he's talking about is where we need to get to. Yes, would it be lovely to be able to get some pure cocaine and sniff it with your lover on a Friday night and, have a beautiful erotic evening together in our utopian world that we're all imagining? Yes. Can you do that now? No. So, I mean, and when that day comes, would an evening like that be included in Cali Sober? Yes, probably, even though you're sniffing cocaine. So, all these things are in context, right? We're not at that point because we're not grown-ups.
Apparently we're not.
I'm sorry, we're not, as a society, we're not grown-ups, so we can't, drug use from grown-ups? No, let's get grown up, and that means educating and getting rid of this just say no binary bullshit. And then once everybody is like, oh, wow, oh no, cannabis is good, not bad. We're not even there yet. We're not even at cannabis is good, not bad yet in the society. Once we're at cannabis is good, not bad, then we're grown up. Then we're more grown up. And then what he's talking about in that book, we might be able to manifest. But if we go from where we are now to what he's talking about, and you can go buy cocaine at the pharmacy, it's not grown up enough for that right now. I would love it to be that way. And I'm sure, we all imagine that, but you have to be really, really, really grown up to have a society where you can walk into a place and get pure cocaine and take it home with your lover and have a great evening. Or pure heroin and do, whatever, chill out and relax with pure heroin. It's just, we're coming out of 100 years of prohibition. We're in the middle of an opioid crisis. We're in the middle of an alcoholism crisis. 100,000 people a year die from alcohol in this country alone. 7 million a year, I think it is, globally. Alcohol alone. So we got to get grown up before we're going to be able to do drugs for grown-ups, I think.
And do we get there by liberalizing access while simultaneously providing better access to support and education and resources and harm reduction resources and things like that? Or do we flip it? Do we start educating? Do we start preparing the infrastructure, preparing us for that grown-up step and then do it? And if so, how do we get people to pay attention for something that hasn't materialized in terms of the law yet?
Wow. Now you're asking the most profound drug policy questions that can be asked by any society. So, I think that decriminalization is very important, as Libby articulated a minute ago. Portugal did it, big success. Pretty much everywhere that's done it, it's been successful in terms of reducing addiction and creating access to treatment. Okay, it hasn't created access to cannabis or other drugs because it's decrim, not legal. Okay, so those are two different things. Everyone should understand the difference between those two things. But decrim is a step to that eventual drugs for grown-ups place. So we have to decrim first. And we're just starting to decrim stuff other than cannabis, the psychedelics in, well, Oregon did everything. We've got psychedelics in Oakland, at least plant psychedelics. Okay, right. We don't have synthesized psychedelics. And there's a couple other places. Denver, I think, did plants, right? Or psilocybin. Mm-hmm. I think
Denver did psilocybin. Their decrim is like a little bit, legally it operates differently than Oregon, which is like super robust and actually changed statute.
Yeah. And so it's starting to happen, right? And it'll take a little while for the heroin and the coke and everything else to get decrimmed, I guess, because of all the stigma. It should all happen at once. It should all happen yesterday. It should all happen tomorrow. It should all be one stroke of the pen, you know, because that would be the most helpful thing. That's the step we need to take. And then legalizing weed and incorporating it with access, wide access in every place in America is another important step. On the backs of that, learning, I think, we're going to see psychedelics get in with the clinical models. Okay, Rick Doblin and MAPS, and we're going to have these nonprofit trip centers you're going to go to if you're depressed, and you can have a trip at your community center. We'll see how many get licensed, how fast, but that's going to happen too. That's already happening, as you know. I mean, it's already happening in the world. For those of you who don't know that, Google it. It's happening, and all those will also provide models for an eventual world of drugs for grown-ups.
Yeah. Here's hoping. I think
it might take 100 years. Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Things move a lot faster now than they did when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think so. Well, so we have about 7 minutes left. I think we should move on to questions from the audience. I know we've got a few in the comments. Let's see. Or how are we doing this? Should I read the comments, or do people want to just pipe up and ask questions?
Are there any questions?
I think if you read the comment, that works.
Let's see. So there's no questions in the chat. We've got a lot of comments that are lovely. So I guess let's see, if any attendees want to just you can raise your hand if you have questions, or drop them in the chat, or we can keep talking because we have a lot to say, clearly.
I have a question for you two, if no one else has a question. So a lot of people have been asking me this question, so I'm sort of gonna just bounce it to you two because I'm curious what your answer will be. What do you think a consumer packaged good of the first psychedelic is going to be, and sort of dosage, how it's going to be regulated, you know, what form factor?
That is such a hard question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me try to narrow down the criteria. Well, okay, so first of all, I'll address why I think it's an incredibly hard question. I am still grappling with what I think makes sense with respect to legalization. With respect to decriminalization, I'm very clear, decriminalizing. Criminalizing substances doesn't help anyone, so don't do it. And then I think, you know, ideally, I would love to see a system that is as liberalized as possible in every sense of the word, where if I want to, you know, order mushrooms from Space Coyote, I can, and I can go and enjoy them in, you know, at Stinson Beach with whoever I want, and then, you know, get someone to safely drive me home. And I also, if someone wants to participate in a plant medicine ceremony with, you know, a church or a group of, you know, with their family or something like that, they can do so in a ceremonial context, no problem. Or if someone wants to go into a clinical setting and get psilocybin assisted therapy, have a few sessions of that, they are free to do so, no problem. I think that my mind is like super stuck in regulation, so it's hard for me to be creative about like the actual good itself, and I'm more thinking about like the methods of regulating that good. But my like ideal and my hope is that the government stays as far away from all of it as humanly possible. Like the more space we can get between medicine and government, the happier I will be. I think the better off we'll all be as well.
Yeah, I see psychedelics splitting into two main areas in society. One's going to be therapeutics and pharmaceuticals, and the other is going to be personal use. So I think on the therapy pharmaceutical side, they're gonna create synthesized versions of psilocybin or LSD or all those things, and you're gonna go to a clinic and you're gonna take a pill, basically, because that's the only way all those publicly traded psychedelic companies, that's the only way they can make money. The only way they can make money is on the drug itself. They can't make money on the therapy. That's expensive. They gotta hire therapists. They gotta have a cool room for you to in it. You got to figure out your playlist. You got to talk to them for 2 days beforehand and a day after. That costs a lot of money. So I see, so that's how it's going to happen. There's only going to be so many. And, you know, if you read Alexander Shulgin's book, P-Call and T-Call, there's plenty of psychedelics that can be made in a lab from the plants. They're all from the plants, basically. So I think that will be one area. In terms of the personal use, already we're seeing dried mushrooms in underground clubs in places like Oakland and Denver. And in Amsterdam, back in the 90s, I walked into places that sold dried mushrooms and some other synthesized things like 2CB and TCT2 and some of those other compounds that are a little bit more designer psychedelics, short acting, not real heavy, dosed at a level that a tourist can walk around Amsterdam and not get in too much trouble with. So that was some consumer facing psychedelics that were available when I was, 20 years ago, 25 years ago in Amsterdam. So I do think that will be, I think the natural dried mushrooms will actually be the first personal consumer facing good, because regulated, because what's going to happen is it's going to be the same thing with weed. They're terrified to regulate it. They're terrified to put it in the neighborhood. They don't know what to do. They're not going to issue any licenses. They'll do some kind of don't ask, don't tell thing like they did with medical in the beginning. There'll be some nonprofit mandates. They won't want to, it'll be like that. And so you won't be able to sell synthesized stuff. You won't be able to sell the pharmaceutical stuff in there. You won't be able to do any of that, but you will be able to grow your own mushrooms, dry them out and sell them. I imagine there'll be limits, all kinds of different limits in the beginning in terms of how many you can buy. Will there be lab testing like there is for weed and all that sort of stuff? We'll see how it rolls out. Hopefully cannabis has taught the regulators and elected officials a thing or two, but probably not, and it'll probably be pretty clumsy. But that's how I see it. Some brave city, I don't know, it might be Oakland, might be Denver, is going to let a retail facility open that has these compounds in them and whoever is brave enough to own and operate that, whoever is the pioneer there, and the DEA will be watching, and, you know, they're gonna be able to sell whatever they can make. They're not gonna be able to get pharmaceuticals. So that's how I envision it happening.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I think we'll do a good job. Look, we have to integrate these compounds very mindfully, man. I mean, you get the wrong kind of human being with the wrong intention and the wrong setting with these compounds, and some very harmful things can happen.
Yep.
So we absolutely don't want that to happen, because if that happens, it could be very harmful to progress with respect to ending prohibition and creating better public policy.
Agreed.
Well, thanks everyone. We've reached the end of our webinar at 6 o'clock on the East Coast, that is. This has been very thought-provoking and great information and wonderful. I think I'm gonna turn Callie sober with a little bit of wine, and a little bit of Prosecco.
You're Jersey sober.
So thank you so much for just an awesome panel, and you know, giving us your time and effort and expertise. We really appreciate it. And we will be, this is being recorded. We will edit it and we will put it up on the Emerald Magazine YouTube channel, and we will send an email out about that. So please, you know, follow us, like it, subscribe. And keep an eye out for our next Emerald Live in April. Don't know the topic yet, but it'll be April 13th. And I hope the rest of you have a wonderful evening. And I'm going to sign out. Hugs and tokes, everyone.